stripping Meghan and Andrew of their titles was the right course.
The palace did not shake because of a public scandal. It shook because of a private order, signed behind closed doors, after a security breach forced the king to choose between blood and the crown. For Andrew, it was not just another restriction. It was the moment the doors of royal life began closing in a way even he could not dismiss. And Charles knew there would be no easy return. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles sat with the security file open before him, his hand resting on the page as if the paper itself had become too heavy to move. The Internal Palace Security Review, a private investigation used to examine risks inside royal residences and official events, had confirmed the breach connected to Andrew's access privileges. The conclusion was plain and brutal. The king removed him from all royal events, effective immediately, before his brother could challenge it. Andrew read the order twice, then stared at the words as if they had betrayed him. He did not look broken at first. He looked offended. Status, loyalty, family history, service, old ceremonies, all of it rose in his mind like a defense already prepared. But the language left no space for pleading. His removal was not a warning. It was active. It had begun. The breach centered on unauthorized movement inside a restricted royal area during preparations for a major palace event, a formal gathering where guests and royal schedules moved under strict control. A restricted area means a space only cleared people may enter, because one wrong movement can expose routes, plans, or protected access points. This was not treated as family embarrassment. It became a crisis inside the household. Charles did not speak when a senior aide entered with the revised event schedule. The aide knew what the silence meant. One name had to disappear. Andrew's name was removed quietly, without announcement, without ceremony, without the dignity of delay. A small administrative act became the first visible sign that the king's decision was real, and everyone who saw the list understood something permanent had shifted. The file carried more than one troubling entry. The confirmed breach was the official reason, yet the deeper fear was older. Palace officials had warned before that Andrew's lingering access privileges created confusion, and now that warning had turned into proof. Someone had known enough to raise the alarm before the review was complete. Someone had seen the danger coming, and once the order left Charles's desk, the story stopped being about protocol and became painfully personal. Before the palace could understand the consequences, it had to face the people trapped inside them. Charles was not only a monarch enforcing security, he was a brother drawing a line across a lifetime. Andrew was not only a disgraced royal demanding access, he was a man watching the final traces of belonging disappear. Between them stood William, Camilla, and a household that knew one wrong move could damage the crown forever. Charles carried the burden with a silence that unsettled everyone near him. Monarchy, in its simplest meaning, is the system where a king or queen represents the nation and protects the crown's authority. For the king, that meant guarding more than ceremonies. It meant protecting trust, order, and the idea that even royal blood could not stand above security. Andrew made that duty painful because the threat did not come from a stranger. It came from inside the family circle. Andrew paced inside a private sitting room. The order folded once in his hand, and then opened again, as if rereading it might weaken its power. The words, "not permitted to attend," burned deeper each time he saw them. He felt humiliated before the public even knew. His public role had already been reduced, but this was different. This did not feel temporary. It felt like an institutional severing, a final cut made with polite language and cold precision. Charles found Camilla later, and said the decision felt colder than grief. Grief, he told her, allowed mourning. This required action. Camilla listened without interrupting, because she understood the cruel shape of it. The queen consort, meaning the wife of the reigning king who supports his public role without holding his sovereign power, could comfort him as a wife, but she could not undo what he had signed as monarch. She saw his pain. She also saw why he could not retreat. William received his separate briefing with controlled restraint, but his concern cut through the room. The prince did not treat the breach as family embarrassment. He saw vulnerability. He saw doors, lists, staff instructions, guest routes, and old privileges that could no longer survive on trust alone. As the future king, he understood that one confused access point could expose the whole palace to danger. His quiet response carried a warning sharper than anger. Aides moved quickly, because Andrew's removal touched everything. Invitations had to be checked. Seating plans had to be redrawn. Security lists had to be corrected. Chapel access, balcony positioning, private receptions and family entrances all needed revision. One order had become a chain reaction, and while the household tried to contain the damage, Andrew made his demand. He wanted Charles face to face. He refused to let paper speak the final word. But the confrontation Andrew wanted did not begin with anger. It began with a memory no one inside the palace wanted to revisit. Every palace crisis has a moment that later becomes impossible to ignore. Not the announcement, not the punishment. The trigger, the point where unease turns into proof. For this story, that moment came during a private reception rehearsal, when a locked corridor was opened. A security officer hesitated, and Andrew's name appeared where it was never supposed to be. After that night, nothing could be explained away. Weeks before Charles signed the order, staff were preparing for the St. George reception, a formal palace gathering where senior royals and foreign guests would move through carefully controlled spaces. A reception, in plain terms, is an official event where members of the royal family meet invited guests, under strict planning. That mattered because every entrance, corridor, and waiting area carried security weight. One wrong route could expose private movement plans. Andrew still held limited family access to certain royal spaces, and that old privilege created danger because staff were never fully sure where courtesy ended and clearance began. Clearance simply means official permission to enter a protected area. Palace officials had debated this problem for months, but no one wanted the argument to become personal. Andrew's name carried history, it carried pressure, and because of that, hesitation became the palace's weakest point. Andrew arrived at the restricted corridor entrance during the rehearsal and insisted he had standing permission to pass. The St. George reception rehearsal was meant to test the movement of guests, staff, and royal participants before the real event, so every person in the wrong place created risk. He spoke with irritation, not fear. He expected recognition to solve what the access list did not. The young security officer checked the screen, saw confusion, and froze. The officer let him through after a tense exchange, and Andrew walked on with visible anger, as if the delay itself had insulted him. Minutes later, the officer checked again and realized the permission was not active. That mistake became the heartbeat of the crisis. Security logs later showed the route passed near a protected holding area for event materials and guest movement plans. What looked like awkward confusion had become a breach. Investigators found the deeper wound when they traced the systems. Andrew's outdated clearance remained visible in one internal record, even after another record had removed it. That discovery changed everything because it proved the problem was not just one moment of pressure at a door, it was a gap inside the palace machine. Charles later received the documented account from the review team, and the king understood the truth at once. This was not merely personal defiance. This was a failure wrapped around royal status. The past had now handed the king a choice, and Andrew was about to walk into the room where that choice would be spoken aloud. The most devastating royal confrontations rarely happen in public. They happen in rooms with closed doors, polished tables, and witnesses waiting just outside. Andrew entered expecting negotiation. Charles waited with the file already closed. That detail mattered. It meant the king had not invited him to debate the decision. He had invited him to hear it. And for the first time, Andrew understood that outrage would not reopen the door. Andrew stepped into the private palace room with his jaw tight and his anger barely held in place. Charles did not rise quickly. He let the silence settle first, because silence gave the decision its weight. A senior aide waited outside, and that mattered, because the palace had prepared for escalation without turning the meeting into a spectacle. No press waited. No public statement interrupted them. This was family pain locked inside royal control. Charles had already authorized the removal from royal events, and an authorization means the king's approval had turned the decision from advice into action. That made the meeting crueler. Andrew had come hoping to fight for the outcome, but the outcome had already passed him. The only question left was whether he would accept it quietly or force the palace to manage another wound. The crown needed order. His brother wanted recognition. Andrew demanded to know whether Charles believed he had intentionally endangered the palace. His voice rose on the final words, as if volume could pull mercy from the room. Charles answered quietly. He said intent was no longer the center of the matter. Consequence was. The sentence landed with brutal force, because it stripped away the defense Andrew had carried in with him. He could argue motive. He could not argue damage. Andrew pushed the chair back so sharply that the sound seemed to cut through the room. Charles did not flinch, and that steadiness made the moment worse. The king explained that the security breach had forced chiefs to reassess every privilege linked to Andrew's name. Security chiefs are the senior officers responsible for deciding who can enter protected spaces and how royal events stay safe. Their review now reached beyond one event, beyond one corridor, beyond one mistake. Andrew heard the list and went still. Private entrances, guest approvals, event access, ceremonial gatherings, royal properties beyond the palace itself. Each category felt like another door closing. He looked at Charles not as a subject facing a monarch, but as a brother searching for the man who once might have softened. Yet the king's face remained controlled, because softness now carried danger. One exception could reopen the entire risk. Charles set the pen down with final care, and said the crown could not bend around one man. Andrew absorbed the words slowly, and for the first time he understood that brotherhood was no longer the only force in the room. Something colder stood behind Charles. Something larger. And behind that final sentence stood the machinery of monarchy, colder and stronger than any family argument. A royal order may carry one signature, but it is rarely born from one voice. Behind Charles stood advisors, security officials, legal minds, and the future of the monarchy itself. Yet the most powerful force in the room was not a committee. It was fear. Fear that one breach could become another. Fear that a private weakness could become a public humiliation. Fear that Andrew's presence had become impossible to manage. Charles listened as palace protection officers warned that unclear access categories had become a danger no one could soften with tradition. Palace protection officers are the trained security teams responsible for guarding royal people, royal residences, and official events. Their message mattered because royal access does not only decide who enters a room, it decides whether staff can trust every door, every list, every instruction. Andrew's status had blurred those lines, and now that blur had turned into risk. William studied the revised security briefing in silence, then folded the top page once before he spoke. A security briefing is a written summary explaining risks, access rules, and actions needed to keep an event safe. The prince understood the emotional damage this would cause, but his restraint made his support for the harder line even clearer. He did not want humiliation for Andrew. He wanted certainty for the crown, and in that room, certainty carried more weight than sympathy. Camilla saw the toll on Charles before anyone named it. The queen consort urged him not to carry Andrew's anger as if it were guilt, because guilt would make the king hesitate at the exact moment the palace needed firmness. She knew the brother in him was wounded. She also knew the monarch could not let that wound guide the decision. Her quiet presence became a wall against doubt, and Charles leaned on that silence more than he admitted. One palace official warned that Andrew's removal had to be absolute for public events. Partial restrictions would create confusion among staff, guests, drivers, guards, and planners. A public royal event means an official appearance where the family represents the crown before guests, cameras, or the nation. If Andrew appeared at some gatherings but not others, every doorway would become a question. Every list would become a risk. The palace could not afford uncertainty dressed as mercy. The review then exposed the deeper flaw. Some ceremonial access rules still relied on tradition rather than modern controls. Ceremonial access means permission linked to formal royal occasions, like services, receptions, and processions. For years, old habits had survived because they felt easier than confrontation. Andrew's position exposed the weakness. His name had become more than a family problem. It had become proof that the palace had delayed reform for too long. Andrew learned the consequence before the public did. His name had vanished from an upcoming event list, and the emptiness around it said more than any announcement could. What had been signed in private was now about to be felt in public, beginning with a single missing name. No announcement was needed at first. The palace revealed the truth the way palaces often do, through absence. A name removed, a chair reassigned, a car route canceled before dawn. Andrew had not simply been told to stay away. The entire royal machine had begun moving as if he no longer belonged inside its public rituals. And that quiet efficiency wounded more deeply than any speech. Andrew learned the first consequence before the country did. His attendance line had been deleted from the final movement schedule, the document that tells staff who travels where, which entrance they use, and when every royal arrival must happen. That mattered because movement schedules are not symbolic. They are the working spine of a royal event. Once his line disappeared, drivers, guards, aides, and planners all knew the same truth. He was no longer expected. Staff were told to treat the change as operational, not emotional, but no one believed it was ordinary. Operational means practical and logistical, the kind of change made to keep an event running smoothly. Yet Andrew's missing place carried history. It touched family pride, public judgment, and the fragile line between private loyalty and royal duty. A chair could be reassigned in seconds. A brother's place inside the monarchy could not be repaired so easily. Andrew stood near a window after confirmation arrived that his car would not be dispatched. He gripped the paper once, hard enough to crease it, then let it fall onto a side table without reading it again. Anger came first, but humiliation followed faster. He had survived distance before. He had survived silence. But this was different. This was the palace moving without him, proving it could function better by leaving him out. Charles saw the revised seating plan later and paused at the blank space where Andrew once would have been placed. A seating plan is the official arrangement showing where each person sits at a formal event, and inside royal life, position is never random. It shows rank, trust, and belonging. The king did not reverse the change. He did not ask for softer wording. But the pause betrayed him. The decision was firm. The pain was real. A palace aide quietly informed security that Andrew was not to be admitted through family-side entrances for event purposes. That order ended a privilege that had survived earlier storms, and it created questions almost instantly. Several guests expected to see him. Aides crafted a controlled explanation, careful enough to avoid exposing every detail, sharp enough to stop speculation from turning into chaos. Andrew's humiliation hardened into determination. He wanted one final private conversation with the person he still believed could soften the punishment. But the next meeting would not involve advisors, schedules, or official files. It would involve two people facing the human cost of exile. After the shouting, after the files, after the signatures, there came a smaller moment. A room without aides. A conversation without strategy. Andrew arrived still carrying anger, but the palace around him felt different now. Quieter, less available. Charles did not stand behind a desk. He stood near the fireplace, tired and still. What followed was not a negotiation. It was the final human reckoning between two brothers. Andrew requested one final private exchange because he still believed there had to be a path back. A private exchange, in simple terms, means a closed conversation, without officials speaking for either side. He hoped quiet compliance might earn him selected royal events again, perhaps a family service, perhaps a controlled reception, perhaps one ceremonial return that would prove he had not been erased. Charles agreed, but only without advisors present, and that choice changed the meaning of the meeting. Charles understood that advisors could protect the crown, but they could not carry the wound between brothers. The king allowed no official buffer because the decision had already been made. What remained was personal. That mattered because Andrew was no longer arguing with a committee, a document, or a security team. He was standing before the one person who still remembered him before the scandals, before the restrictions, before his name became a problem the palace had to manage. Andrew told Charles that removal from royal events felt like being erased from the family. His anger cracked as he said it, and for the first time, hurt stood where pride had been. Royal events, meaning official appearances where members of the family represent the crown, had once given him purpose, status, and belonging. Without them, he felt reduced to a private man carrying a public disgrace. He wanted the king to hear that pain, not just the policy. Charles answered with quiet pain of his own. He said family and duty were no longer moving in the same direction. His voice broke slightly, but he did not soften the decision. The king knew mercy without boundaries would only reopen the breach. Andrew wanted proof he still belonged. Charles needed proof the monarchy could protect itself. Both men were wounded, but only one carried the responsibility of the crown. Andrew asked the question that decided everything. Was there any event he could attend as before? Charles looked at him and said no, not yet. Not under the old rules. The monarch offered private family contact under controlled circumstances, but public royal life was closed because the breach had changed the terms permanently. Andrew left without slamming the door, and that restraint told Charles the decision had finally landed. By morning, the palace could no longer contain the shape of what had happened, and the public saw the absence for itself. The public did not need every detail to understand the message. Britain has learned to read royal silence like a headline. When Andrew was absent from the event list, absent from the cameras, and absent from the family formation, the meaning became unavoidable. Something final had happened. The palace could control statements, but it could not control the image of a royal event shaped around a man who was no longer there. Royal watchers noticed first, and their shock moved faster than any official explanation. Andrew's name was missing from a scheduled palace event where his attendance had once been expected, and absence became its own announcement. Royal watchers are people who closely follow the family's public appearances, schedules, and signals, often noticing small changes before the wider public understands them. This mattered because the monarchy often speaks through order, placement, and presence. When one familiar figure disappears, the silence feels deliberate. Buckingham Palace released a brief statement confirming that event attendance had been adjusted following security considerations. Buckingham Palace is both a royal residence and the main working center of the monarchy, so even a short statement from there carries institutional weight. The message avoided every sharp edge. It did not explain the breach. It did not describe the private anger. It did not name the hurt inside the family. But it confirmed enough. Andrew had not simply chosen to stay away. The palace had changed the terms. Charles arrived at the event composed, but no one watching closely mistook composure for peace. The king did not look triumphant. He looked burdened. Every step carried the weight of the brother he had removed, and the crown he had protected. That contrast gave the moment its power. Success for the institution had come through suffering inside the family, and Charles knew the country could see both truths pressing against his face. Andrew watched the coverage privately, and his expression hardened when the broadcaster paused on the royal lineup. The broadcaster's framing was simple and brutal. One missing figure now told the story of the day. He had expected debate, maybe sympathy, perhaps confusion. Instead, he saw clarity. The country understood that his absence had meaning, and that meaning no statement could soften. The public reaction found its sharpest symbol the next morning. A major newspaper front page showed the royal procession with one empty space circled in red, under the stark headline, "The door closes." Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered near the gates. They did not cheer. They did not shout. They stared at the railings as cameras turned the palace into a symbol of judgment. Charles already knew what the public had now learned. The decision had moved beyond family discipline. It had become a defining statement about survival. And when the noise finally settled, what remained was not scandal, but the meaning of the king's choice. In the end, the story was not simply about Andrew losing access to royal events. It was about Charles proving that the crown could no longer protect every wound inside the family at the expense of the institution itself. The decision hurt because it was personal. It mattered because it was public. And it endured because, for once, the monarchy chose discipline before damage could become disaster. Charles knew the removal had changed more than one man's calendar. Royal governance, in plain words, means the way the monarchy makes decisions, controls duties, and protects public trust. This moment mattered because personal history no longer carried enough weight to overpower security, credibility, or the confidence of the people watching from outside palace gates. The king had enforced a boundary against his own brother, and that made the order impossible to dismiss as routine. Andrew was left with the hardest truth of the crisis. He had not been cast out of blood, but he had been removed from the public life that once gave him status. Royal events, meaning official appearances where the family represents the crown, had once allowed him to stand inside the institution, even when his role had weakened. Now that space was gone. He still had a name. He still had family ties, but the automatic belonging he once trusted had disappeared. Charles carried no victory from the decision. The king looked once more at the sealed file before it was taken away, and the glance said what no statement could admit. He had protected the monarchy, but he had wounded the family to do it. A sealed file means a closed official record, kept private because its contents are sensitive. For him, it was more than paperwork. It was the proof that duty had demanded something colder than forgiveness. William's quiet support gave the moment its future shape. The prince understood that the confirmed breach was the official turning point, but the deeper revelation was harsher. Andrew's old access had survived too long because family discomfort delayed necessary reform. The future king saw the lesson clearly: fewer sentimental exceptions, clearer boundaries, and a stronger divide between private family ties and public royal duty. The verdict was final. Andrew's removal was not merely punishment. It was a line drawn for the survival of the crown. Charles lost a piece of family peace. Andrew lost the last illusion of automatic belonging, and the monarchy gained something colder but necessary: control. This was the moment the palace stopped asking how much one man could be forgiven and finally asked how much the crown could afford to risk. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.